did medieval religious art in Central Europe / the Holy Roman Empire impact the perspectives of commoners during their own time? Okay, so did you know that religion has an exponential impact on societies and cultures? Raise your hand, please, if you do know that. Awesome, so a lot of people. So religious art might have more of an impact than I originally thought before I started this capstone. Originally, as someone who loves history and cultural studies and who is always searching for answers and asking questions, much to the annoyance of the people around me who have to deal with it, I had never really thought much about the impact of this kind of art on people and the general population, or anyone. And as such, this became my capstone project. So there's that. Now, I believe it is important to talk about the sub-questions which go along with my overarching question. Of course, these are different and serve a slightly different purpose than usual. These sub-questions are: what was the primary purpose of medieval religious art in the Holy Roman Empire? That's the first one. The second one is, what are some motivations behind the people who made this art? And the third one is, how did significant cultural events throughout Europe influence what the messaging in these art pieces conveyed? These sub-questions are extremely important for this capstone because this research is the backbone of these questions. And so if these sub-questions did not exist, I would also not have a project. Okay, so what is this topic going to be covering exactly? It is important to note that these three things here are very, very important. First of all, this art is strictly related to religion in Central Europe, so the Holy Roman Empire area and some surrounding territories. So this art is either telling some sort of Catholic or Christian story. So art that is depicting lessons related to the faith, etc. Next, this art is strictly from the Middle Ages, so there will be no legitimate branches of Catholicism or Christianity here to talk about, since if you did not know, the Middle Ages came before both the Renaissance and the Reformation. This is a good thing for my project because that would be way too broad of a topic. And it should also be noted that this is just strictly the Western Church and not the Eastern Orthodox Church. Also, the Middle Ages and medieval times mean the same thing, and they are used interchangeably by scholars and historians, so I will be using both. And finally, this is only the geographical area of Central Europe, or roughly Central Europe, so hence I am using that as kind of a guideline, and also the Holy Roman Empire's borders. Plus some of the northern Italian territories, since they are not only part of the Holy Roman Empire as well, but because they also play a very important role in Catholic influences in the government during this time, including today. So you might be wondering, is this even a feasible senior capstone? The answer is yes, and this is due to the fact that a lot of this project's research is from the humanities, with some also being science-based, making for a more diverse topic than if I were to just have the most research or all of it be humanities-based. It should also be noted that there will be no definitive answer, as we cannot physically or literally glimpse into the minds of people who lived that far back, especially because they are not ourselves, they are their own people. That would be impossible. So this presentation is merely providing a research-based information to come to a reasonable and realistic conclusion, just as any historian or researcher does. So as I previously mentioned, this project will have different aspects in terms of the research provided. They are not done in any specific order when I researched them, but rather they are just separated into their own sections. I'm sorry, can I have a tissue, please? This is getting very bad. Thank you so much. Thank you for waiting. That was very unexpected. So let's see, where was I? Ah, yes, methodology. So my methods for my research were not done in one specific order when I researched them, but they are just separated into their own sections. So one of these sections is historical evidence and events. So these are just things that give context and relevance to what is being discussed through real-world events. Another section is the art itself, which is surprisingly not the most important aspect of this research, and it's just a very small amount. And then the next and final one is philosophical ideas and sociology, and that naturally had to be added as a section to balance out the humanities part, since this cannot be answered without at least some scientific basis for human behavior surrounding art and the cultural or social aspects in such art pieces. So as for a proposed outcome, I was hoping to create a mural on campus where each class can show their artistic expression by adding to it every year. This could help other students feel more comfortable being here and could bring more creativity to the school. It could also help students to feel more connected to St. J Academy. However, I was unfortunately not able to get everything together to make this a reality, as that was not, I was not able to get such materials to build something like this, and I also did not have the people to help me achieve this goal in time. But nevertheless, the research in this capstone managed to accomplish the other proposed outcome, which is understanding. With that said, let us move on to the research material. So, to begin my dive into this research, I started on trying to find classical medieval art pieces, usually paintings and frescoes. This here is a medieval painting titled The Mourning of Christ, and it was created by the artist Giotto di Bondone. According to Isabella Mayer, who is head of content of the art encyclopedia Art in Context, this piece was made in order to stir sympathies for Jesus Christ in the hearts of viewers. So from this information, it can be deduced as a deliberate way to engage people in the art, whatever that purpose would serve, that of which will come later in this presentation. This conclusion is also supported by Robin Jensen of Sacred Art in Context, which states that medieval religious art was specifically made to invoke emotions in believers. It was also meant to teach people to live in a godly way, similar to that of Jesus Christ. And such examples of these living in a godly way include selfless acts for others, forgiveness for all, and grace, which is what Jesus Christ here is meant to represent in this piece. Now, according to my research, while the Catholic Church wasn't the only group to influence art during this time, there were many artists who would create pieces specifically for the church. This is called the act of patronage. And while it is not so much of a practice now, it was a large and influential way of religious expression back then. And these artists who created art for the Catholic Church got paid handsomely for it. Some famous artists at the time who did this and who were patroned were Duccio di Buoninsegna, who was hired to create works to put on religious and government buildings in Italian states, Nicholas of Verdun, who was a famous metalworker and goldsmith, and Giotto di Bondone, a painter from Florence who was mentioned previously in this presentation, and many others. So while these are only a handful of individuals I've mentioned, it should be noted that there are many, many more. In fact, there are more famous ones that I did not mention for the sake of time, and you might know them yourself if you do know about this. So after searching for answers to how the church could possibly get artists to commission this much art, I found that it was actually not just religious reasons, but political as well. Unlike today in the United States, for example, where religion and politics are slightly more separated than some other parts of the world, the two were completely intertwined during the Middle Ages. According to Matthew Innes, the author of State and Society in the Early Middle Ages, the politics of early medieval Europe was defined by a mediating role in the aristocracy as the interface between the political center, the center government and possibly the Catholic Church, and the localities. This information provided more stability to my research as it confirmed to me just how much the government, which was ruled by religion, controlled nearly every aspect of medieval European society. In addition, Paul Friedman of Yale University says that up until the Reformation in the late Middle Ages, all Christian religious art could have been in conformity with Catholic doctrine. As such, the Catholic Church and the government of the Holy Roman Empire had nearly all political control over what religious art was presented to the average person. So now we need to connect this back to religious art. Here is another example of a piece of art from the time period. Let's skip to it. So this one was made by an artist of the Catholic Church, and it is called a Christ Pantocrator, or Christ ruler of all as it translates. This version here is the earliest known painting of its kind, according to Isabella Meyer, and here we can see that Jesus Christ is portrayed as having a softness to the lighting and style of art, along with a two-dimensionality. This creates not only a more welcoming and holy image of Christ, but also paints him literally as holy and pure, due to the absence of realism for being two-dimensional. While it should be known that Christ Pantocrators were more common in the Eastern Orthodox churches rather than known for being in the Western Catholic Church, depictions of Jesus Christ during the Middle Ages were very common still, and either way had often very similar symbolism. This religiosity in medieval art not only extends to paintings and frescoes specifically, but is also seen in medieval architecture as well. Places of worship, according to R.W.K.C. Robertson, a church architect, must have meaning to the worshiper. He states how it is not just the design of the church, but the position of various articles, the design of the holy table, font, and pulpit are all important. He also claims that if there are any windows or drapery in the building, that they should convey some biblical meaning or they are useless. It's not just the style of a building either, which is its own art in of itself, as that was mentioned previously. As Donna Sadler of the Medieval and Renaissance Altarpiece describes it, every architectural space has a gravitational center, aka a part of the building where the rest will be metaphorically or literally built around. This creates, according to Sadler, a symbolic role, such as the altar being symbolic due to the location, stating how the shape and medium of the altarpiece varied from location to location while still keeping a focus on Jesus Christ's last days on earth and his resurrection. While architecture might not be the first thought that comes to mind when people think of medieval art, it is arguably just as important as art pieces in the medium of paintings, frescoes, and statues. So, how do we connect this to religion in the life of someone of this faith and similar faiths, such as Christianity? While this presentation will eventually get to the effects of religious art as the information comes together, it is crucial to talk about how this all connects to the everyday life of Catholics and Christians before we delve into the more science-based parts of the research. So according to the Pew Research Center, in their publication Religion in Everyday Life, roughly 7 in 10, or 71% of Christians who took part in the survey are grateful for what they have, and 69% of Christians in the survey forgive those who have wronged them. This shows how the religious art that, for lack of a better term, was in many aspects of society could teach people to treasure these ideals, since faith is a key aspect of religious art, as seen in the previous pieces I have shown. In addition, according to Richard E. Sullivan of the Medieval Church and the Patronage of Art, Pope Gregory once said, "Painting can do for the illiterate what writing does for those who can read," meaning this art could have been specifically meant to promote Catholic ideals through faith. However, it is also important to keep in mind that this varies by the modern sects of Christianity, whereas back in the Middle Ages, Catholicism was pretty much just one cohesive form of belief, rather than having various different branches. Now, this can be connected to how society functioned during medieval times. Unlike today, where most places do not live under feudalism, it was Europe's standard. While monarchs ruled with much power, the government governed itself side by side with the government, as according to Infobase's social organization in medieval Europe. The Catholic Church was the greatest source of literacy, brainpower, and bureaucratic community among medieval Central Europeans. This lines up with what William Pells of A People's History of Modern Europe says, in which Pells states that as information became more common and affordable, by the end of the Middle Ages, there, the common Europeans' opinions of religion changed, gaining a more strong feeling of hatred for the wealthy elites. In addition, as I mentioned before, this would not happen until the Middle Ages began its end. This reaffirms how medieval European commoners could really only get their beliefs from their faith, as even if they had access to what information the nobles and higher classes did, most of what was written for and by nobles was just the well-written down version of that art that regular medieval Europeans saw. So to reiterate, so you can all understand how this all ties back together to the overarching question. Because of the church's influence through the government, what would the average Central European see? According to Isabella Meyer, the art was created for and by the churches would be rich with religious symbolism and imagery. As I discussed earlier in this presentation, the art examples I showed were specifically meant to be just like that. Nearly all religious settings had religious art in them, according to Robin Jensen, who is part of the art history and classics at the University of Notre Dame. Chloe Redaway and Ben Quash of St. Andrew's Encyclopedia of Theology describe how the history of art is profoundly and inescapably marked by its relationship to the Bible. This shows yet again that nearly everyone during the Middle Ages would have seen religious art in their everyday lives, which my research keeps showing through such art pieces and other information that could not be fitted into this presentation. It is important to understand that through my research, I found that openness tends to create a stronger sense of symbolism in people. According to Kirsten Wehr, the author of What Happens in the Brain When We Experience Art, religious people are more likely to have greater feelings of personal communication and empathy when viewing religious art. Due to the average medieval European having Catholicism and Christianity as their main source or worldview, due to avoiding an unsavory afterlife being the main purpose of life back then, which was discussed in previous slides relating to feudalism, it is natural that this would cause a very religious society. Robin Jensen also mentions how visual art in places of worship encourages a profound response in the people viewing it, which, as was mentioned before, deepens devotion to the church. As such, one can come to the conclusion that being exposed to this kind of art with these themes in a time where there was not much variety and information given to the average person would create a larger feeling of belief. This ties back to what other individuals cited earlier said about the devotion to the church. That is, art being used as more of a tool, for better or for worse. So in my findings, while we cannot peek directly into the heads of others, we can make logical conclusions based on the evidence that is out there. As my capstone has grown, all of my sub-questions were answered, and ultimately the overarching question was answered as well. This project has shown me that while cultural differences might not have made that large of a change across the Holy Roman Empire in terms of religious art expression, it has certainly, as a whole, created a history where religious art greatly impacted the people who lived during the Middle Ages in a way that was influenced by their beliefs. Overall, my project reached one of my goals in some ways and failed in others. In terms of success, my project gave me answers. It answered my questions to what I did not know. It also provided you all, my audience, with information on such a topic. However, I was not able to get the mural, as that ended up being a task which was proven to be a little too ambitious to get off the ground. In terms of my sub-questions, let's go over them. The first one, which is what was the primary purpose of medieval religious art in the Holy Roman Empire, was solved here, and that was a big help to my capstone. I learned that the purpose of this material was for creating stronger beliefs and encouraging behaviors in line with the Catholic doctrine. The second sub-question, what were some motivations behind the people who made this art, was also a big help, as my information had become to the conclusion that the motivations were similar to the answer of the first sub-question. That is, it was meant as a way to solidify Catholicism in society. Finally, my third sub-question, how did significant cultural events throughout Europe influence what the messaging in these art pieces conveyed, helped as well, but to a lesser extent. As while cultural events significantly drive religious movements, there was really only Catholicism and Christianity, so other branches had not become prominent yet until after the Middle Ages. However, it was still a useful sub-question as it provided how intertwined religion and culture is. When one exists, the other is there. So to conclude, while there may be various reasons as to why the Catholic and Christian churches of medieval Europe wanted to create religious art, why patrons wanted to create such art in the first place, or why normal, everyday people wanted to as well. It is ultimately